Well, hello again, and today we're looking at the book of Job to finish up our discussion of the Hebrew Bible. Um, book of Job is what's called wisdom literature. Um, for some people, because this is in the Bible, it has to be something that actually happened. I, I'm not so sure about that. Why can't you have something like a play in the Bible? A play, um, the story might not be an actual story of something that happened, but it you could use that in order to communicate a message um, that you believe is true. Um, but either way, the emphasis is not on whether or not this actually happened. The emphasis is what is the author trying to say with the story? Because after all, even if it really did happen, that's not the point of the book. It's set in a faraway, distant time. And as the story opens, we are basically told two things about Job. One is that he is good, and the other is that he is rich. Now, that wealth is expressed not in money. Coins have not yet been invented, by the way. Wealth is measured in livestock. When I was a pastor at a little town in North Florida just outside Gatorville called Micanopy, some of those churches, I was pastor of a four-church circuit. Some of those churches went back into the 1800s, and looking through the records, some of my predecessors had been paid part of their salary in livestock, a pig and so many chickens and things like that. So, for that matter, when I was in seminary, I had a classmate from Kenya named Wilson Langat. And while he was in the States studying, his family was working to build up their herd of cattle. Because for him to be able to marry his girlfriend, as they both wanted to do, he had to be able to give her father a certain number of cows, wealth measured in livestock. And he has a large family. In traditional societies, large families are a sign of prosperity, that you can afford to feed them. Newsflash. Children are expensive. Okay? It costs a couple thousand just to bring them home from the hospital. So Job is rich and he is good. Now, think about the idea of the covenant that we've been talking about the last few sessions. How does the author expect us to connect these two facts? If you do the will of God, you prosper. If you don't, you suffer. Job is prospering. Job is rich because he is good. Now, if all you had was there was a man called Job who was rich because he was good, the end, it would be a really boring story, now wouldn't it? What happens to change that? Well, there's this conversation in heaven between Yahweh and the Satan. And I want to emphasize something real quick right now that's going to shock some of you. And that is that Satan in the book of Job is not, repeat, not the devil. He's not even an evil figure at all. Satan in the book of Job, the word Satan means accuser. He is the prosecutor, the district attorney. Yahweh is depicted as being like a king who is head of government. And part of his government, part of any government, is a prosecutor. Notice that when Satan shows up in heaven, nobody says, "What are you doing here? Get out of here and go back to hell where you belong." He has been, in fact, doing his job, going back and forth in the earth, keeping an eye on people so as to be able to bring to God's attention people who are stepping out of line and so need to be punished. For a long time, in my years at Grambling, I knew the district attorney for Lincoln and Union parishes, Bob Levy. We go to the same church. We're not close friends, but we're acquaintances. He knows who I am. I know who he is. He knew who my kids were. Both of my daughters sang in the choir at Trinity. And so, when he attended graduation and they crossed the stage, he shook their hand and congratulated them because he knew who they were. Bob Levy's a nice guy. When his wife was dying of cancer, he did absolutely everything he could do to take care of her. Model husband. But I used to tell my students when he was DA, don't get in trouble with the law. Because what is the DA's job? To prosecute people that are thought to have broken our laws. Okay? That's what the Satan character in the book of Job is. See, I'm going to introduce an idea that really I've already introduced with the idea of the Hebrew Bible not being about going to heaven when you die. And that is the idea that religion evolves over time. A lot of people are kind of uncomfortable with this idea because they've never encountered it. But it's true. Everything in this world is evolving and changing over time. Our language changes. If you don't believe me, read Shakespeare, the King James Version of the Bible, with all the these and thous and eths and edsts. Do we talk that way today? Our language has changed. We no longer say to our friend, "How goeth it with thee today?" Well, in the 1600s, you might well have said that. Our understanding of the world changes, and that includes our ideas about God. Change over time. In fact, when we get to early Christianity, I'm going to introduce you to a very different way of reading the New Testament against its original Jewish background. So there's what amounts to a bet between God and Satan. Essentially, Satan says, "I bet Job wouldn't be good if it didn't pay off." And God says, "I bet he would." Well, that raises an interesting question, and I think this is one of the key questions that this book is ultimately about. Are human beings capable of doing what is right simply because it's right? Or will they only do what is right if it pays off for them? In other words, will you be good for nothing? And that's a very interesting question, because if I do the right thing, but I do it because I expect to be rewarded for it. How good is that, really? Am I really being good? Or am I just being smart? And doesn't that suggest that if doing the wrong thing paid off better, I would do that instead? You see what's at stake in the book of Job here? Will humans only do what is right if they're rewarded for it? Or are we capable of being good simply because it is the good and right thing to do? And essentially, God says we are, Satan says we're not, and there's only one way to find out, right? And that is to take away everything from Job. He loses his livestock. His children are all killed. He even loses his health. And illness in the ancient world was often viewed as a punishment from God or the gods, because we have done something to offend them. And as he's sitting there grieving, his wife confronts him, and this translation I think is accurate. Job chapter 2 verse 9. Do you still maintain your integrity? Renounce God and die. Some translations have her say, curse God and die. Well, now what does that mean? Is she saying that he should say, well, God damn God? I don't think so. I think what that means is forget this goodness stuff. It doesn't pay. But he won't do that. Job's friends come to comfort him, and they sit with him for a week. And then they mess it up by opening their mouths. You know, people sometimes tell me that they don't know what to say when someone is grieving a great loss. Well, my answer is that it doesn't much... that's not terribly important. What matters is that you're there. If you don't know what to say, just say, I'm sorry. It doesn't take away their pain, but you know what? You don't have the words to take away their pain. Just don't make it any worse. When I was pastor of that 4-church circuit, an elderly couple in one of the churches told me about an encounter they'd had a number of years before with one of my predecessors. They had found out just before going to church on Sunday that their grandson was terminally ill with cancer. And as you might imagine, they were pretty broken up when they went to church that morning. And when they told their pastor at the time, my predecessor, his first response was, well, he'll be better off in heaven. You know, there are any number of things that he could have said that they would not have remembered 10 years later, but they remembered that because it came across as being terribly cold and callous. It did not take seriously the pain that they were feeling. I want you to think about what Job's friends are basically saying to him in the dialogues between Job and his friends. and how comforting that might be. Or might not be. As, for example, in chapter 4, Eliphaz talks about how God always punishes the wicked and rewards the good. And if you're suffering, I would commit my cause to God. Verse 17, happy the man whom God corrects. Therefore do not despise the chastening, the punishment, the spanking of the Almighty. And Job won't have any of it. How many of you ever heard the expression, the patience of Job? I wonder if the people who talk about the patience of Job have ever read the book. Because Job doesn't sound very patient to me. Look at Job chapter 7. As a servant who earnestly desires the shadow, the shade of evening, as a hireling who looks for his wages, so am I made to possess months of misery. Wearisome nights are appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise and the night be gone? I toss and turn till the dawning of the day. You ever been sick or depressed or lonely? Often, isn't it worse at night? In the daytime you have other things to occupy your mind, but at night you lay there and you toss and you turn and the mind races. And he says to God, verse 16, I loathe my life, I don't want to live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but a breath. What is man that you should magnify him, that you should set your mind on him, that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment? How long will you not look away from me or leave me alone till I swallow down my spittle? If I have sinned, what do I do to you, watcher of men? Why have you set me as a mark for you, so that I'm a burden to myself? God, what have I done to hurt you? Why don't you pardon my disobedience? Take away my iniquity. For now I shall lie down in the dust. You will seek me diligently, but you will not find me. Job does not even have the comfort that later generations would have of believing that all of the suffering that's inevitably part of life in this world is made up for in heaven. Because remember, that belief's not yet part of the biblical tradition. In chapter 14, he talks about how a tree, if it's cut down, may sprout from the roots. I've seen that myself in my yard. I had a tree growing in a place I didn't want a tree, and I kept cutting it down, and it kept growing back. Job 14, verse 10. But man dies and is laid low. Yes, man gives up the spirit, and where is he? As the waters fail from the sea and the river wastes and dries up, so man lies down and doesn't rise. Until the heavens are no more, they shall not awake or be roused out of their sleep. How could he say more plainly that he has no hope of a life beyond this one? He even, it seems to me, back in Job 9, comes pretty close to accusing God of being unfair. Well, that debate between Job and his friends goes on for much more than I've given you to read. But I gave you enough to hopefully give you the gist of it. The climax comes in chapter 38, when God appears to Job, Job has demanded God come down and answer some questions. Well, God does. But what kind of an answer is it that God gives? Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man, for I'll question you, and you answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. You're so smart. Who determines its measures if you know? Or who stretched the line upon it to measure it? Whereupon were its foundations fastened? What's holding up those pillars at their bases? Who laid its cornerstone? The answer of the book of Job to the question debated by Job and his friends, why do bad things happen to good people, seems to be that the answer is beyond human comprehension. Why does one person get COVID and die, and another one gets it and doesn't have any symptoms at all? I don't know. And I don't know anybody who does. Why does a hurricane hit one place and not another? I don't know. Why does a tornado go through town and devastate one house and kill the family there, and another house 100 yards away is completely untouched? I don't know. Is it always the case that suffering is because someone is being punished by God because they've done something wrong? Aren't there times when somebody suffers because somebody has done something wrong to them? But look at the postlude and the epilogue. And I don't know if you noticed, but in the book of Job, the prologue, the opening chapters, and the epilogue, the last chapter, chapter 42, at least most of it, is in prose, regular writing. The dialogues between Job and his friends and God are all in poetry. In that epilogue, two things happen, one of which I think we can see coming. The other is, I think, shocking. The one we can see coming is that Yahweh restores Job's wealth. He has twice as much wealth as he had at the beginning. And he has a fresh batch of 7 sons and 3 daughters. And we can kind of see that coming. Job really didn't deserve what happened to him, so God makes it up to him. But in doing so, the author shows that this is not a modern mind. My wife and I have 2 daughters and 1 son, in that order. And they're now all in their 30s. If we were to lose them and somehow, despite our advanced age, were to have a fresh batch of 2 daughters and 1 son, would they replace the ones that we have now? Absolutely not. Children are unique and irreplaceable individuals to us. It's your second child that teaches you that. I remember my oldest daughter, when she was little, just loved for me to toss her up in the air and catch her. She would just giggle and laugh and have a great time. I did that with my younger daughter exactly once. The scream was heard in 7 states. I did not do that again. It's your second child that teaches you that children come into this world with a distinct unique personality already there. And one of the challenges of parenthood is to figure out where each kid's buttons are, because they're not in the same places. What works in dealing with one kid may not work in dealing with another. But clearly to the author, this does replace the first batch of children that he had. Because to the author, children are a kind of life insurance. This is how you live on after death. But the other thing, the one that I find absolutely fascinating, is God's reaction to Job's friends. He says, my anger is kindled against you, because you've not spoken of me what is right as my servant Job has. And so you need to give animals to Job and have him offer them for you as a burnt offering, and have him pray for you that I will forgive you. I think this is fascinating, because Job's friends are giving the pious, orthodox Sunday school answer that fits on a bumper sticker. And the author of the book has God reject that and accept Job's angry questioning. I think that's fascinating. You know, I've heard people say a lot, it's God's will and you can't question it. Well, the author of the book of Job doesn't believe that. In fact, biblical authors in general don't believe that. The Bible is full of people questioning God. We don't always get answers that we can understand, but we ask the questions. And to the author of the book, that's okay. You know, when my kids told me that they hated me because I'd said that horrible word, no, I didn't get upset. I understood that they were angry because they weren't getting what they wanted. And I knew they'd get over it. And I was fairly confident that I knew what was good for them better than they did. Well, if I can understand that, am I better than God? The author of the book understands that. Final comment from a Jewish philosopher named Abraham Joshua Heschel that gets at the point of the book that was debated between God and Satan at the beginning. Are human beings capable of doing what is right simply because it's right? Or will they only do it if they're rewarded for it? Abraham Joshua Heschel says that it's important enough to the author to be able to say, yes, human beings are capable of doing what is right even if it doesn't pay off, that he's willing to run the risk of having God appear to be unfair in order to establish that, yes, we are capable of doing that. See, I think the book of Job is basically a philosophical drama. It's the closest thing to a play or a movie script in the Bible. And the story is intended to raise questions. Is it always the case that suffering is God's punishment for sin? Is it that simple? Or are there sometimes other reasons for it? And on that note, we end our study of the Hebrew Bible.